how that the full scope of the potential of the covenant has to be realized. And so it has to be extended to the Gentiles. Peter became defective, and it was a state of the heart. It was a corruption that had come in on the strength of Judaism. And now God had to look for another functionary that did not have that corruption. So there was a shift in the administration of things upon the face of the earth. And because of that shift, a new set of ministers that were appropriate for the implementation of that policy had to be chosen. Anytime there is such a shift, it doesn't just affect, it's not just the style that changes. It also influences the kind of ministers that can function in that regime. There is a change of ministers as I speak now. For some of you who already know, it is very clear. People that have been following the trend. But in the next 5 years, it will be bountifully clear. And even blind people will acknowledge that God has changed gear. Because a shift in the policy in heaven affected the kind of functionaries that can operate in order to administer and implement that which heaven wants. So a shift in policy direction can occasion a difference in spirit administration upon the face of the earth, which will implicate the kind of functionaries that can implement what God wants. Secondly, we saw that when the current spiritual structure becomes obsolete and incapable of changing or challenging the current darkness, God occasions a shift. He occasions a shift because he has a blueprint. And God's blueprint is its eternal purpose. And nothing can stop God from achieving his eternal purpose, because his eternal purpose happens to be one of the few things that can satisfy the desire of God's heart. So that you are running a big ministry, for instance, and so much finance, you're on every platform, you're on TBN, you're on Faith TV, you're on every possible platform that money can pay for, and you also have your own personal television outlet. All right, the fact that you have such structures doesn't mean that you're inevitable in the plan of God. It may be, that's why we need to become people that are travelers, because Abraham, God was calling him, and the pattern that God pioneered in the life of Abraham is descriptive of what God wants to do in the life of every son of faith. Descriptive. There's a dimension of what is pioneered in Abraham that will be illustrated in your own work with God. And that's why he's a reference point. He's a father. He's a patriarch. And what God does through patriarchs is that he establishes patterns. Patterns that forms our culture. Patterns that determine our modus operandi. Patterns that can be followed without missing our possibilities. So there's a part of Abraham that is going to be expressed through you. And that was why God put him under stringent supervision to ensure that his life fulfills a certain pattern which is descriptive of our destiny. Are you with me? All right. But see, one critical thing about the story of Abraham was how that he had to leave the country of his nativity. And he had to navigate through spiritual pathways. By spiritual pathways, I mean that his destination was not known. God didn't tell him his destination. His only possibility of arriving the place that God was sending him to was his subscription to revelational droppings that God will make available. Are you with me? Secondly, because of the circumstances under which Abraham had to execute the mandate of God, so much details were not given to him in his navigation. There is something that is guaranteed. It means Abraham cannot quarrel with God. Because the possibility of Abraham arriving at the place that God was sending him was tied to his relationship with God. So he couldn't have a quarrel with God. There was no argument as to who was in charge between Abraham and God. So Abraham was absolutely, totally dependent on the move of God. That is how every preacher is supposed to be. No preacher has the right to camp when our God is mobile. All right? So we are supposed to be like expert surfers. As the waves rise, we surf on this momentum of the wave, and when the wave is dying out, you jump to the other.